Hi, I'm Karen Alari, and in this video I'm going to demonstrate how I painted this painting. It's called A Yellow Broom Spring, and it's a little acrylic landscape painting I did on 9 by 12 canvas. This is one of the reference photos. I love the beautiful colors in the yellow broom, and this is the second one I used because I wanted to add a little interest. I wanted to get that barn in there. This is my palette, and you can read all the colors of paint I use. Basically, a warm and a cool of each color, reds, yellows, and blues, and then I add a transparent gold and a transparent magenta as well as white. So this is the drawing. Doesn't matter which color you start the drawing in, and I'm just using it to place my main features onto the canvas and give myself a roadmap. One of the things I think about is the rule of thirds. Basically, it's good to put focal points in. If you were to divide the canvas in thirds, lengthwise and widthwise, where those thirds intersect are good places to put focal points. So I've kind of put the barn there. I'm actually introducing this barn into the scene completely from the second reference photo, though the photos were taken on the same day and in the same area. They're just so they have the same lighting and the same basic colors, and that's important. It's really hard to take two different photos that have completely different lighting. The sun's in a different direction, a different color. It makes it harder to put those together. So I've moved on to the block in, and the block in is just basically getting the big basic color shapes onto the canvas, covering the white of the canvas and getting the basic colors in there. Values are really what you're looking for. How dark or how light is that hill compared to the hill behind it? That's the value, and it's really important in getting a realistic look to your landscape painting, and it's very important in getting a sense of depth. As things go back in the painting, they get bluer and lighter, and that is called atmospheric perspective, and that's what gives us a feeling that we're moving back in space on this flat surface. Here I've added the mid-ground trees, and I'm again looking specifically for the value. How dark is this tree line compared to the hills behind it? And you can see how the trees further on the right are a little bit lighter than the dark set of trees on the left. That puts them back further on the picture plane. Here I'm adding the bright spring green grass area, and as I'm adding it, I'm putting in some lighter areas, some darker areas, some warmer, cooler, just layering the paint as I go to add some depth and interest. And you can see I became cooler and lighter in the back. There's a lighter value to the grass, and then as I came forward, I got more chromatic. There was more color added to the green. There was more of a vivid green, and that makes it come forward in the painting as well. I'm continuing here with the back tree line. My block in is complete. I have all the white of the canvas covered. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on in the foreground, but it's all going to be laid on top of this background, so I won't block it in per se, because it's just going to be a mess of tangle of twigs and flowers up in the front. So as you can see, I laid in my darker colors to this tree line of branches and trees, and now I'm putting the greens on top of those darker colors. It's all a process of forward and back with painting in the landscape. You paint a little bit of the background around the tree, and then you paint more tree on top, and you keep, at least I do, I keep layering these things together until I get a feeling of a tree. And one thing that I really liked about this reference photo was the fact that this beautiful soft blues and greens in the background. So as I'm doing these trees, I'm laying down some paint, but then I'm coming back and making sure that all my edges are soft. Here I'm coming back in and I'm softening up the edges, because this is far in the distance, so you wouldn't see any sharp edges. Your eyes wouldn't be able to visually see any sharp edges to that background line of trees. So now I'm continuing to finish up and add those greens. I put in a little tree branches, and then I put leaves back over the top of them. And now I'm adding in the barn. And again, this barn I took from a different reference photo just because I wanted a little more interest to the painting. And I'm just blocking in the basic shape. I'm using a small 3/8 of an inch flat brush to get a pretty sharp edge on that. When I'm painting things like a barn, I'm just trying to look at the shapes. And again, comparing light and dark. Here's a small triangular shape that's light and one that's dark, and just moving back and forth. My problem with this barn, and I'll show it to you in a minute, there's a face in the barn. There's the two windows in the door make a really significant face. There it is, if you can see it in the background. And I really struggled with that. I kept putting the face in and taking the face back out. So a lot of what I was doing to try to do this barn was that. And here I've come back in with some green and blue to reshape the shape of the barn by doing negative painting, which means I paint back in the background. Oh, there goes the face again. So I just go backward and forward for a while until I found a shape that I thought was simple enough and read as a barn. And I ended up taking the windows and the door out entirely and just have a little suggestion of shadows and dark back there. Sometimes it takes a while on a structure like this just to get it to where you want. There I'm putting some shadow under the eaves. That makes them look more like eaves, and adding the little side building that came off of the barn to make it look a little more barn-like. You know, you want to put some lights, some darks, some warm colors, some cool colors, just to look like that old weathered barn wood. It's kind of fun just to play with it and try to find something that reads as a barn without being so detailed. Again, this is in the distance, so you wouldn't see a lot of detail to this barn. You would just see the basic shape and the basic color, and you'd know it was a barn. Everybody loves a barn in a landscape painting, it seems like. Still struggling with those shadows and to get the angle right. Just look at the reference photo, put the shape in, take it back out until it works for you. That's the wonderful thing about acrylic paint, is you can just paint right over what you've done without making a big muddy mess. Oh, there goes the face again. Alright, I think we're about done playing with this. Let's move on. Sometimes you can get stuck in spots. Okay, now I'm coming back in and I'm just adding some interest. Taking those colors and putting a little red in with the green, and making them a little lighter, a little darker, a little quinacridone gold, just to make it look like the variations that are in grass. Not painting in every little bit of grass, obviously, but just making variations. Here I'm also putting in the more shadow color in the trees. Now I'm coming back forward to my middle ground of trees. Adding some shapes. I use the side of my brush a lot and just add in those shapes in just a dark neutral color to get some shapes. One of the things I liked about this painting was the shape of those branches against the light sky and the darkness of them against those soft blues and greens in the background. This whole bank of trees will also set up a dark area, so when I put in my foreground light colors, they'll pop more against them. Contrasts are really important, to find those contrast areas like that. So here I'm adding more blue of the back hills around the trees, give them a lighter feeling. I do this a lot. I just go back and forth with the background and the foreground, in a way kind of painting the back of the tree and then painting the middle of the tree and the front of the tree. You don't want those edges along the top to be really hard, so one way to soften an edge and acrylic is to come back over with the background color and just lightly lightly paint it in there. You see I'm using the side of my brush a lot. I'm just rolling and tapping the side of my brush, and that way the paint works off of the canvas and off of the layers of paint below to just give a interrupted kind of natural look to the brush stroke. Okay, coming back in with some green over the top, adding those slightly greener branches. Of course, these are pine trees, so the green is going to be bluer than the green in those spring trees that are in the background. That's a wonderful thing. A lot of people don't like green on green landscapes, but gosh, there's so many colors of green you can do. Cooler greens and warmer greens, darker and lighter, grayed down greens. Pine trees will often have a more blue green, and it's also grayed down. So I'll take my blue, which is often made from Phthalo Blue and Cadmium yellow, add a little Alizarin Crimson to it, and that'll gray it down some, which is nice. Phthalo Blue you have to be careful with because it's so bright and clear, which I love, but it's a very strong color, so you have to use it sparingly. Okay, I've added a couple of fence posts now to the painting. The fence, what I'm trying here is actually having the fence recede a little bit in the background, and I actually end up later changing that again because my foreground bushes cover that left fence post entirely. But at this point, I thought it would be interesting to have the fence recede a little bit into the background. So I'm just laying in these mid-ground greens. This is going to be the yellow broom bushes. In the mid-ground, there's some in the mid-ground there, and then there'll be some in the front. So these ones that are back further, I'm making the color more muted. This is sort of the background yellow, or the shadow color, yellow color. And I'm making the edges softer and the colors more muted in this bank of yellow broom. And as I go and have a color on my brush, a color I've mixed, I'll add that a little bit to the background too, and to the grass. Here, as my paint is dried, I see that the background trees are drying a little duller and darker than I wanted them to, so I'm coming back in with some lighter and yellow or greens to make them feel more springy. Adding a little bit of that yellow to the grass as well. I love that bright yellow spring grass. It's so refreshing and wonderful, and especially against those blue background hills. Okay, so just so it doesn't look like just solid green blobs, I continue to add a little bit of browns and brushwork in the bottom, just brushy twigs and stuff that would be there. Okay, here's some of the yellow of the yellow broom bush. Just using the side of my brush and tapping that in there. I'm gonna add, I had put in a darker green or yellow as the shadow color to those blooms, and now I'm adding a brighter yellow, coming back with some green. I love about those yellow broom bushes in the spring, the foliage is such a brilliant bright green color. It's so pretty. Adding some grays to represent the twigs and brushes. In the springtime you get that everything is brown and gray except for the green and that comes with the new growth. So if you get that gray in there, it gives you something for contrast. Now I noticed that my bush was a little half circle. It was very regular in shape. So I'm coming back in with the background green and making that shape more irregular. That's the hardest thing, is our brains want to make everything symmetrical and irregular and regular. And in nature, there's really very little that's symmetrical and regular. So yeah, constantly fighting that in our minds to create an irregular shape. Okay, a few highlights on these yellow bushes, and we're done with part 1. Hope you can join me for part 2 of Yellow Broom Spring.